as the crow flies on the Vance Crow podcast.
Right.
James Gurney, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Vance. How you doing?
So while you have a British accent, you are actually living in Atlanta, Georgia, and you are a PhD that studies something that is all around us, but almost nobody knows anything at all about, which are bacteriophages. And you and I have gone on a wild road trip across the Southwest. We've been on podcasts together. We've known each other for years. And I was really interested in getting your perspective on what's going on with coronavirus, both from the academic science perspective, but then also just how's it impacting my buddy that I haven't seen in quite a few years. So welcome to the podcast, man.
Thank you. It feels a bit full circle now. I think we first met when you came on my podcast. What was it, like 5 years ago now?
Yeah, that's probably right. The League of Nerds with Miles Powers.
That was it, yeah.
And that guy Buck.
That guy. I'm doing all right. So you've summed it up pretty well there. I'm a research scientist. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow is the technical title down in Georgia Tech in Atlanta, working on phage therapy research. So I'm going to explain this like you never heard it before. I know we've talked about this before, but so my research basically asks the question of like, can we take a virus that infects bacteria and use it as a treatment? And this might sound fanciful to some people, but this is like a century-old technology now. This was first described in 1917. It fell out of favor because we did something much better. We discovered antibiotics basically, 10 years later. I think Fleming did it in 28 or 29. So that sort of the need to rely on a sort of complex, squiggly biological organism was superseded by the fact we had this chemical, this amazing chemical, which just kills bacteria, doesn't kill humans, works really well, was reasonably easy to purify and make a big mass amounts of it. Whereas the phage was like, well, we have this thing, we're not really sure what it is. It might be a virus, it might be a bacteria, it might be a chemical. Does it work on this bacteria? No, it doesn't work on that bacteria. Does it work on this bacteria? Yes, it works on this bacteria. And this sort of this unusual little biological entity that no one really understood what was going on for, the best part of 50 years until we really understood, okay, these are viruses of very specific viruses for very specific hosts of bacteria. Every bacteria probably has one of these viruses, but you can't just take one and say, oh, it's going to work on all these bacteria. It's specific to its host.
It's an interesting thing because you think about the world as bacteria, viruses, plant life, human life, and maybe you could have some like more nuanced characteristics in there, but when it comes to phage, we never learned about it in school, and it is like a very weird construction. It's got like a tube on the top with this geometric figure on the top of it, and it grabs a little bit of its own DNA and injects it into bacteria and then makes the bacteria mass produce the DNA for the phage, and then it explodes the bacteria, and then that phage goes all over the place. And there are way, way, way more phages than anything else in the world. But the thing that was interesting to me is that we're not really quite sure, are they alive or not, which is an interesting question.
Well, it's the same with any real virus. Like, it depends where you draw the line of where they are, where things are alive or not. So I call them biological entities. My boss thinks viruses are alive. And that's not like, oh, he's crazy and thinks viruses are alive. It's sort of like where he draws that very fine line between this is living material and this is not living material. He's like, well, viruses, they reproduce, they reproduce with selection. They have their own genetic material. The only thing they can't do is survive without their host. And that's sort of, and they also don't really have metabolism. Well, some of them do have metabolism. So it's when you start looking at biology at this level, it becomes incredibly clear just how fuzzy our definitions of what is and what isn't alive actually is. Like, I could wake up tomorrow and be like, no, they're dead, and I could wake up the next week and be like, no, maybe they're alive. And there's no clear or fast answer here about what biological life actually means.
Yeah, it kind of strikes me as the weird, like, the closer you zoom into something, the more that you know it, the less you're convinced that you know what something as simple as alive or dead is, on or off, 0 or 1, because as it turns out, not all of the features of our beings around us follow the same rules that we do.
Definitely. It's there's compartments of different things that you like. We said there's these 6 or 7 things you need to be considered alive, and you actually, when you look at it, it's like, well, it's just a smear across like the planet. My favorite other thing to talk about when we have these discussions is mitochondria. So in America, mitochondria are taught as the powerhouse of the cell, which I've always found funny. When you mention mitochondria to any American, like, oh yeah, the powerhouse of the cell. It's like, it's this weird, like, American Canadian thing. You guys, they don't have that in Europe or the UK. That's not a thing. But so mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. They make energy for us, and pretty much every single eukaryotic cell, like you, me, plants, everything that you can see, there's a mitochondria making energy. These about 2 billion years ago were free living bacteria. At some point, another bacteria came and gobbled one of these up, and they decided to live in symbiosis as opposed to like eating it. And that led to like 2 billion years later to having enough energy to make bigger and bigger cells. But the thing that's mind blowing to me is the fact that this was once a free living bacteria, alive as anything else on the planet. Like, it was alive. It was a living organism that had been alive for 2 billion years through evolutionary history, and then it got eaten and it didn't die. But over 2 billion years since then, it's evolved to be dead. If you take a mitochondria out of a cell, it's dead. It's not a living material. It can't survive by itself anymore. It's no more alive than a virus. But that's happened through evolution. Evolution has selected for something to be dead. It's just like how
and like you think about like what other organism grabs another organism and makes it not just like work for me as a slave, but like actually incorporate it in and becomes a part of the way that your own DNA writes out and produces more mitochondria. Yeah.
Well, this is a really cool thing. There's whose book is it? It's maybe Nick Lane. He talks about how, he didn't discover this. He just popularized it. But part of our genome has bits of the mitochondria DNA in it. And obviously the mitochondria also has its own genome. It has a little bit of bacterial DNA still in every cell. It has a little circular chromosome. That's how we know it was a bacteria, because it has a little circular chromosome. It has the same 16S kind of like bacteria, like a very specific gene. But it shared some of its genes with us, but not all of them. So it looks like at any minute it's ready just to pack up and go home. Like it's got its own genome. I'm going to leave you. I don't need you. It's this little thing packaged away. So it's I could talk about this for days, but it's an amazing insight into just how powerful natural selection is, to see, okay, it's put this gene here and that gene stayed here. There's a reason why some of the genes are in our chromosome and some of them are still in the mitochondria, and it's all due to natural selection.
So as you're studying phage research, what drew you to that? I mean, people have never even heard of it. Yeah,
I have wanted to work on phage since I was about 7 years old, I think it was. I remember the moment I was my mom picked me up from after school. She worked. I was at an after school club, and I asked her, because she's a microbiologist. I asked her, why don't they use viruses to kill bacteria? Like, as you know, this little 7-year-old kid who had no idea what I'm talking about. And she's like, well, they do. They're called phage. And then she sort of explained a little bit about phage to me, and she bought me some book about animal life, like the mechanisms of animal life. Like, so it was like they took everyday animals and like made them into like machines, and then you could open up, pop-up book kind of thing. They open up and then like you'd see inside the animal, and they had at the back was a couple things on viruses, phage, and bacteria. And I just fell in love with this idea of like these things that are the enemies or things that make you sick are out there. They're somewhere in nature. And then, I went away to university, 10 years later, I studied all those things. I studied bacterial communication for my PhD. And eventually I got to the point where I was like 2 months away from finishing my PhD. And I was on Twitter, PhD student, have loads of time to just hang out on Twitter. And someone had posted a job to work on phage therapy research in Montpellier in France. On the organism I was working on during my PhD. I was like, oh, cool. I love phage. I've had these ideas. I'll email the guy. And like at that point, I was like, I hadn't seen very many people working on phage, like out and about, because it still is quite a small field. It's only a handful of researchers who have the money to work on it. And most people are working on it are either doing, like I am now, a mixture of evolutionary studies and phage therapy. And there isn't a huge amount of people doing other things on it.
What do you think is possible with phage research? Phage therapy?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? It's stopgap's not the right word, but it's going to pick up the slack from antimicrobial resistance. Like, I'm not one of these people who think like phage are the solution to everything. We have the solution to everything. It's antibiotics. They are amazing drugs. They are so good. They work so well, and we've kind of squandered them and used them inappropriately. I think we're going to use phage to basically pick up the pieces where we've made mistakes. Phage has limited uses. Like, there are cases. I know I've met people now, and I'm so fortunate. We can talk about this later if you want. I've met people who have been given the phage I work on in the lab, and it saved their lives. That's amazing to me. But we should have never got to that position. We should never be in the position where it's like we have to use something experimental because we've been so irresponsible with the magic bullets we have of antibiotics.
And when you're talking about being irresponsible, you're saying we had antibiotics that were grown, essentially started from fungus, where we figured out like, hey, this chemical produced can wipe out all of this bacteria, and it can wipe out good bacteria and bad bacteria, just knocks it all out. But the problem is, if you keep using that over and over and over again, you're going to find a few bacteria that they aren't knocked out by that antibacterial property. And so then they start growing, and then you have what people call superbugs. And phage, if you can find the right one, which that's the real difficulty, it has to be hyper targeted to a particular bacteria. But if you can find the right phage that attacks the right bacteria, then antibiotic resistance may not kill us all.
Yeah. Well, it's never going to kill us all. It's just gonna be really terrible. like this. There's two things, right? The two things I worry about antimicrobial resistance. The first is, like we're seeing now, there's a pandemic happening, and we know there are secondary bacterial infections from COVID-19. People are getting infected with bacteria that are then taking advantage of the weakened immune system, or the terrible immune system stuff that's happening, and causing sepsis. That's how some people are dying right now. They're dying from a bacterial secondary infection due to the COVID-19 virus. So we've always said, a lot of people have said for a long time, the risk of antimicrobial resistance will be when the next pandemic happens, if an antimicrobial resistant pathogen, bacteria, is in the population spreading around, we're going to have increased mortality due to that, and that's what we're seeing right now. Fortunately, the bacteria that are actually killing people right now, I say fortunately, people are dying, but they're not particularly antimicrobial resistant. We're not seeing an AMR comorbidity happening with COVID-19. But again, what we're seeing now will happen again within 100 years with almost certainty, unless we change the way we live quite drastically. There will be another worldwide pandemic at some point. So today's problem still be the future problem. The other issue is I have a better chance of dying from an antibiotic resistant bacteria than I do from cancer in my lifetime. By 2050, more people will die from antimicrobial resistance than currently die or will be dying from cancer. And we think about all the people you know who have unfortunately have died of cancer. And then you say, okay, well, more people you know by 2050 probably would have died from an antimicrobial resistance bacteria infection.
That's a startling thing, and I'm instantly drawn towards finding some way to disagree with you, even though I have no idea what the numbers are, right? So my immediate reaction is no, that's not right.
No, that's not. It's very possible it's not right. That's from a scientific report called the ONeill Report. I think it was published 6 or 7 years ago now. It does take some liberties with the modeling, and it does take some. I think that report is a little overestimated, but it's one of the biggest wide-scale reports we have, and in the absence of better, more conclusive evidence, it's worth thinking that this is not outside the realm of possibility. It's just it's a model what people have developed, but I always like to point this out when I'm giving talks, because again, people look at me and go, "Oh, that's a big number," and it's like, well, it doesn't matter. Today, I know people are dying 5 miles from me down the road in the hospital because of antimicrobial resistance. It's happening today. It's not like one of these nebulous things. Oh, in the future we'll have this problem. There are children, elderly, middle-aged people with minor infections will die because of antimicrobial resistance.
So this makes me think of a question that I think is on a lot of people's minds right now, which is we are going to die, all of us, unless we find some super amazing way to do healthcare that's inconceivable right now. So when we start talking about you are going to die of these things, or this is your likelihood of dying, it can come off as be afraid, so now listen or fund or whatever to my idea. How should we divide the line between those two things?
I don't know. As exciting as that as response is, it's really not my expertise. I'm very insular. I work on what I would consider a fairly wide range of things. I work from bacterial communication, infection dynamics, up to understanding policy of using viruses to treat bacteria. There's a fairly wide gamut of things I have to be involved with. In like when compared to most other scientists, I'm doing a wide range of things. But I also don't know. Like I'm not an economist. I'm not I'm not much of a philosopher. So like I think we should be funding more. I say we should be funding more about public education about sciences and stuff. But then I see what we've done. We mentioned the podcast earlier. I always feel so terrible now. Like Miles and I spent 4 or 5 years weekly talking to a couple thousand people. And it's all been for really nothing, because now we're in a position where the leader of the free world is telling you drink bleach. It feels very weird to have like such a small effect on the planet. So my opinion may be not worth anything. I think we should be funding more antimicrobial research stuff. But I don't. You've caught me in a trap here, because I don't like to use fear to sell people things. I often see this as like a pseudoscience technique. People will use fear to sell something to someone. Like you see it all the time in like the anti-vaxxers and the anti-GMO people. They try and trying to say that was designed to make you afraid and say, I have the cure, I have the solution. And I can't all good consciousness say, well, I have a cure. It's like, I don't. Like, that's the whole point of science. We need to work out better ways forward. But yeah.
I think you've just done something really humble that's easy for a guy like me to do, because I don't know. I cannot read the papers. And it's not that I'm not an intelligent person. It's that I did not spend the years and years and years it takes to understand deeply what a p-value is and how the statistics. So I can kind of look at something and take an abstract.
P-values.
Yeah, but I can take an abstract and I can say like, okay, that sounds like a pretty good narrative, but I don't really know. And I'm comfortable saying I don't know. One of the weirdest things that's happened in the coronavirus is that every single person involved in this, spare like the 10 people that studied this particular type of epidemic, is actually really vulnerable to the Dunning-Kruger effect, where they've read a few things, they have a story in their head, and anybody that assaults it is assaulting your tribe. So people become deeply entrenched. And it's like, I don't understand how anybody can be confident, because I wake up in the morning, I'm like, hey, the sun's shining. I bet coronavirus is pretty much done now. And then I go downstairs and see a few things on Twitter, and I'm like, oh man, we're in the thick of it now. Things are only getting worse.
So my small contribution to the coronavirus, I helped Kurzgesagt, the German YouTube channel that makes science videos. I helped fact check their script about the virus. I tend to be their go-to person for like microbiology stuff. So for your listeners who don't know, there's a YouTube channel called Kurzgesagt. It's German for in a nutshell.
So people know it is in a nutshell too here in the US. Yeah. They make excellent videos about a wide range of topics. They typically try and be as like middle of the road as they can. They try not to take sides about certain things. Obviously they they have an opinion. They have an editorial voice, let's say. But for like the biology stuff, like they typically come to me for asking, is this correct? And at the beginning of February, I was like, oh, so there's this virus starting in China. It's probably going to become a pandemic. Do you guys want to make a video about it at some point? If you do, let me know. I'll line up some experts. That's the other thing I do for them. I line up experts and say,
you have this topic. I know an expert in that field. We did one about GMOs, and I passed them to Mary Somerville. Here's an independent scientist. She doesn't work for one of the companies. She doesn't work for she's an independent researcher. She knows what she's talking about. For the CRISPR-Cas one, I lined them up to talk to a malaria geneticist working in UCL who was they were talking about her work. It's like the work you're talking about. I know that scientist. I'll send them an email. She can fact check your script for you. So I offered to do this for the coronavirus, and they're like, we don't like to be sensationalists. We don't like to make clickbait topics. They don't want to be the company that's trying to chase a story. They want to make cool things when they have their time. So we're not going to do it. It's like, fine, cool. I respect that. And then 2 weeks later, they're like, yeah, about that video idea. It's like, yeah, okay. So I went to talk to a couple of people at my institution. I tried to talk to 3 people. One of them, not surprisingly, he was too busy. So he works on vaccine development for coronaviruses. He was doing this before. He's a world expert on coronaviruses. His entire lab is basically being given millions of dollars, trying to the government's seeded tons of money trying to get things going a bit quicker. Really cool research, really great guy. Obviously was busy. So I was like, okay, this video is going to get seen by about 10 million people. That's the typical size their audience, their channel has. I was like, that's too many people for me to comfortably be the expert voice. So I tried to go and find some of the people, and I found talked to some epidemiologist people, and sort of said, same sort of thing. I don't trust myself to have 10 million people reliant on the message I'm going to say. So we fact checked the script. We went through it multiple times. I ended up reading probably 95% of the new research that came out on coronavirus since January. So at the end of March, I was probably the leading expert on coronavirus, just molecular pathology, not every paper, just anything that talks about how the virus actually makes us sick. It's a really interesting. I always feel weird saying interesting when I'm talking about how viruses kill people. Or I often say,
it
really
is
cool.
interesting, and it's actually probably the most interesting thing in the world right now is how does this thing work, and how much of our life should we switch to be able to respond to the way that it kills people? That ultimately is the most important question in the world right now.
So I think we're doing on all that topic. I think we're doing a pretty good job. And we can get back to that. So I my little part of the coronavirus of that side was basically fact checking the script. I think it's got seen by 23 million people now, which is fantastic. And I said to them, because it takes 2-3 weeks at a minimum just to make these videos, because there's a ton of animating, there's voiceover, there's script checking, and I think this is the quickest they've ever gone from script idea to video out. And it's a team of 15, 16 people. So you can think they are working 24 hours a day basically for 2 weeks to get this out. And I was like, it's going to, we have to think, where are we going to be in 2 weeks time? What's the best information for people to have in 2 weeks time? So that's why the video, I think, hopefully, we timed it pretty well. You could, if you had some idea of public health policy, you could see that the lockdowns are going to start coming into effect in America, in the UK. I think Italy already had one coming into effect, and so Spain as well. So there was a conscious decision on our part to say, okay, what is the best information to have in 2 weeks time for people who are going to be starting to be asked to go into lockdown. I think we did a pretty good job there.
So as a person that studied the molecular pathway and you've watched how much people know, you've watched the news, what is something about the disease that people don't realize in the way that it works?
Ooh, I think a lot of people don't realize that there's a huge component of the immune system is actually what causes the damage. The virus has several proteins inside of it that directly interfere with how our immune system communicates with itself. So the immune system is at its heart a communication system. It tells cells, go here, do that. Go here, do that. Go here, be that. It's amazing. Super complicated. And it's even, again, not actually my field. Immunology is not what I do, but I love it. It's amazing. I have such respect for people who can just sit there and like recite off these like interleukin pathways and work out what's going on. It's amazing stuff. But there's at least 3 or 4 proteins in corona-like viruses that interfere with the system. That's one of the symptom of losing your sense of smell or sense of taste. That is a direct result of one of the non-structural proteins in coronavirus. It interferes with is either TNF alpha or INF alpha, like interferon gamma. It interferes with the signaling in the immune system, and that leads to a loss of taste.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I mean, I had heard that as a rumor, but no indication as to why that's true.
Yeah, it's one of the proteins. We know there's a protein there that interferes with this pathway. It's the same reason when you have the flu, you often lose your appetite. Like that's not because you feel sick. That's not like, oh, I feel groggy, so I don't want to eat. There is literally something interfering with the signaling of your immune system, which downregulates your appetite part of your brain.
Wow. I wonder if we could use that in good times to make it so people don't want to overeat. I
think the problem is you'd also get a fever. Like if you start playing with your brain would start making your body cook itself.
So as a guy that understands the metabolic pathways and has access to scientists, how have you responded? Once you found out the disease was out there, what did you do personally?
So in early February, I contacted my family and my friends and said, FYI, this is coming. It's going to be big. Now's the time to prepare for things. Now's the time to get, make sure you have a month's food supply, make sure you have some water, make sure you know where all your health insurance documents are, make sure you have your medication lined up. Like my father had a heart attack a year and a bit ago. So, he's obviously still on medication. It's like, okay, go to the pharmacy now and ask them for 3 months of supply of drugs because you're going to need it. This is the things you need to get done right now. And like I had talking to the podcast, like I told both Miles and Buck this. Buck took it to heart and like basically went out and bought like a survivalist kit. Like he filled up his gas tank. He had food for months. And Miles, being Miles, like it's fine. So like didn't do anything. And then like 3 weeks later, when the lockdown was happening, I was like, oh, so how are you guys getting on? And Miles was a bit sheepish, like I didn't listen to you. And Buck was like, everyone thinks I'm a prophet because I knew it was coming. Because all his friends think he was insane because he was going out and doing these things. What worries me the most about that is that it was obvious. It was super obvious to anyone who was looking that this was happening. And people just didn't do anything. And I get why. Like the last time this happened was swine flu. And again, the media were like, oh my God, swine flu is going to kill us all. It's going to be terrible. It's going to be terrible. It's going to be terrible. But the difference was there were a lot of the actual experts were on the news or the radio saying it's going to be bad. It's not too bad. It should be okay. And maybe a few sensationalist voices saying it's going to be terrible and stuff. But the majority of experts were saying for swine flu or MERS or SARS were saying it's a problem if this happens or it's going to be a problem if this happens. In early February, I knew there's a guy who is an excellent epidemiologist called Mark Lipsitch. And I don't know him personally, but I know multiple people I work with directly have met him and know him personally. And they were like, he is not the sort of person to say, I'm going to be quite mean here. He doesn't like to say anything controversial. I don't want that to sound bad on him, but he's very phlegmatic. He's sensible. He's sure of himself, all this sort of stuff. And he was on Twitter saying basically, this is going to be a pandemic. This is going to be terrible. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, yeah, screw it. Like he's right. Like this is we have to start taking this seriously. And that was the biggest difference for me. We had people who are, I would consider sensible experts, incredible experts on the topic saying this is going to be a pandemic, and they were not listened to. Why? How what is the point of having these people, in our world if we're not going to pay attention to what they're saying?
Well, so the flip side of that could be that if you listen to the people that have the narrative that this is so bad that we should lock everything down, people taking that to heart are shutting down a business that they've been running for 30 years. And that 30 years is, work and blood and sweat and tears. and it's all put up on the reason that we could believe it was the people that didn't used to freak out are freaking out, and so therefore all the work that you've put in, throw it in this dice and see what happens. We may come out in a month or two. So I can understand why people didn't want to agree with it.
I get that. And I should take that to heart more than I normally do. I have, there's two things I would come back with that as saying. One, and counter to my own point again, when we talk about expertise, I was watching, obviously my university is still working. We're still having weekly seminars. I was watching a talk yesterday about moss and global warming and sort of like nitrogen flux environment in northern East Montana at some point. I know nothing about any of that. And I am in the same building department center as these people. So it's not like, oh, we're the same university or we're the same biology department. We share the same center, which is like a group of 10 hand-picked academics who are all meant to be roughly in the same sort of field. I know nothing about what she was talking about. And it was all great work. I don't want to sound like I'm saying it was bad work. It's not my topic of expertise. I knew the technique she was using. I knew the statistical analysis she was using. I have no idea of before she told us, how this change in this nitrogen would actually have any sort of impact. There are so many layers of expertise required to fully understand what these experts are saying. And, again, I'm very lucky that I'm expert enough in infectious diseases to see these people are the experts. So, again, I should take that more to heart. The other thing I would say is with, being the filthy socialist I am, if only there was some sort of tax system we paid into where during hard times the government would support us and, pay back into the community. So that to me would have been the best response would have been, okay, well, there's a pandemic happening. I was about to say it's completely unexpected. It wasn't. It was guaranteed to happen. That's the other crazy thing, right? This was one of your previous podcasts, Black and White Swans. Fantastic, analogy. This was definitely something we knew was going to happen. We've known for the better part of 100 years, these things happen. We should prepare for them. We have no justification not to have been ready for it. Why didn't governments take a more direct role in saying, okay, this is something, if we don't support the system now, it will collapse. And that only benefits very few people who have the resources and capital to come back and, buy it back up again. We saw that in 1939, Great Depression. Who makes money in the Depressions? The very, very wealthy.
When have you seen the video of the two doctors that YouTube took down? Have you seen this?
No, but I saw people complaining about it.
So this is an interesting thing, right? So people are saying, listen to the experts, medical and epidemiologists. And then there were two guys out in California that said, we're going to take data that our urgent care facilities have provided us because we see patients, and we're going to tell you what we're seeing and how we react to that. And the internet immune system went bananas on them. And on the one hand, they went from having, I saw it on, I think, Saturday night at 800,000 people. By the time I woke up at 8 a.m. and it had 380,000. And now it's up to 5 million, and YouTube took it down. Yeah. When that starts happening, when people say, hey, there are some ideas that the institutions are not going to let us hear. Yeah. You're a guy that studied conspiracy theories for a long time. Does that benefit the scientific community taking that down, or how should we think about this? I don't know. And I've always had this thing. I really hate saying an idea is dangerous, because in reality, no ideas are not dangerous. How people use ideas is dangerous. That's the dangerous thing. So it's I don't know what they said in that video. My understanding from people who I respect, who were sort of saying this is the issue with the story, is that they were sampling a subset of basically a bias subset. So they have patients who are definitely sick doing, they're looking at a very small subset of, think of survivor bias. If you only study people who are confirmed sick, you find very different things. If you ask how many
hypothetically, let's say you have two groups of people and you say group A smokes and group B doesn't smoke. And you ask group A, okay, run up this flight of stairs, we'll measure your heart rate. Group B, same thing. And then you ask how many cigarettes group A actually smokes. And they'll typically underreport because people like to underreport stuff. So your risk to like how much cigarettes will hurt the ability to climb up and down stairs will be lower than it should be. If you then take a group C and give them how many cigarettes they said, you say, okay, well, that you can then do the control there. So it's, again, there's probably some sort of bias in the sampling they were using. Again, I'm not actually even too sure what they said because I don't want to sound mean to medical doctors, but they're not specialists in this topic. Medical doctors are specialists in treatment. They're not specialists in how diseases necessarily spread or how infection actually works and stuff like that. They are specialists in keeping people alive in certain circumstances, not in how there are some medical doctors who, I don't want to tar them all, but the majority of them are not microbiologists. If I've trained doctors in microbiology and some of them are terrible.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting system that we have set up in the West as far as medical doctors getting the purview of like they know all things health. Yeah. But there are a lot of things like nutrition or how do the bones and muscles attach and how does that all work together that they get a small amount of lesson. But the thing that I would say everyone should take away from the two doctors talking was they spoke with intelligence. Mm-hmm. They spoke with passion and with telling a story, and they had millions of people watch. Part of it was because it was good news that we all want to hear. Part of that was like, hey, somebody is telling me this isn't the Black Plague. This isn't the most terrible thing ever. But another big part of it was they were like, you can do what you want with this information. We're just going to present it to you. Yep. And I think the scientific community has done this is what we know is happening, and therefore the world ought to react this way. And that creates a suspicion that people are using data to force an ideology. And
I think we have to be careful of that, right? Like one of the things I personally believe one of the things we need to bring us out of this is contact tracing. That would be an amazing thing to have. But then the other side of my brain is like, oh God, no! Like I don't want them to know my data like that. I don't want that to happen. And then it's like, well, okay, what is the value currently of having that system in place? What is the future issues of losing that liberty? Because again, I joked earlier I'm a lefty horrible socialist. I do believe that the Bill of Rights America has is amazing. Like, I'm always so annoyed when Americans throw away their liberties. Everything is like, no, you have so many. Don't do it. Like, what are you doing? It's crazy.
Because not every place has them, even in the Western world, right? Like the freedom of the press and freedom of assembly, that does not exist even in quote unquote free countries. Yeah.
And again, freedom's a smear of things, right? But again, I fully agree. Like we shouldn't rush into like surrender more freedom just because we can right now, and it might help in the short term, and it would help in the long term as well. There are other solutions to it as well, and I agree that we should be cautious about how much we do. But I want to go back to that thing about the internet. What did you call it? The internet immune system.
Yeah,
right. It's amazing how effective that can be at just shutting down any discussion. I think part of it is there's a very big incentive to monetize controversy, right? Like from right from the top, from like CNN on news huge $1 billion corporations to if I'm a Twitter account handle or a YouTube user, if I make controversy, I will get eyes on that thing. And it doesn't matter what the topic is. All our media is designed to do is to commercialize controversy. And that's what's happened here. I think that's what's happened with the thing. Like the only reason they got eyeballs on their thing is because they were saying something potentially controversial. If it was, if it wasn't controversial, no one would be having any say. And that's not a good way to decide public policy. It's not a good way to decide, taxation or anything. we have to at some point work out how to get out of the situation that we found ourselves in. And this isn't like a left or right thing, like politics wise. That's again, it's a false dichotomy. Like, I don't understand how we arrived in a place where, I do understand, but it's complicated, right? How it's become so easy to say, okay, well, that's a left idea, this is a right idea. If you don't agree with us wholesale, you're out, you're gone. The guy from the genetics company you're talking to the other day, again, like
Kevin McKernan, like, you're talking about.
Yeah. I sent you a message saying, he's talking bollocks here. And I believe that, like, again, but I the other clips I've seen, he's obviously a very intelligent guy. He's obviously done incredibly well. He's not an idiot. But if I was to make this a topic, I would just, the guy's an idiot. You shouldn't listen to anything he says. I think he should be more careful what he says, but that doesn't mean he shouldn't be allowed to say some of the things he's saying, right? And he talked about how he doesn't like the idea that vaccination has no liability. That's because he was talking about free market stuff. Again, I'm not an economist. I'm sure he knows more about economic. He's run companies. I've run a lab. But in my position, it's like, no, okay, well, the reason we don't do that is because if you didn't have freedom from liability, you'd have no vaccinations being made and people would die. And I think on wholesale, it's probably better that we have that system. We typically end up in places where we have the best of a worst situation, right? like democracy is the best of the worst type of every type of way to govern people is terrible, but democracy is the best of them, of the terrible ideas. It's the same with like how we currently legislate vaccinations or how we currently legislate most things. We have to find something that's is the best worst solution out there.
I'm struck with the internet immune system is the fact that this is actually a new immune system that has come online that we're as human beings barely. It's like taking on the mitochondria and incorporating it into your own biology, because on the one hand, the pandemic would not have been possible, the shutdown, I don't think, if you didn't have the internet. If you didn't have a way for people to rapidly spread information and to be able to hear from a whole bunch of different points of view, to be able to grab news, not just at noon and 5 and 10, which is when the old way was doing it. And there are some pros to it. You don't have the yellow journalism where that gets us into a battle in Cuba because 2 newspapers decide they want to make something happen. But on the other hand, you also then have both the proliferation of conspiracy theories, but then you also have people that are narrative gates and people that are saying the only views that we are going to accept or allow in here are the ones that have already been a part of the official gatekeeper network. And there are some ideas that are so dangerous or so wrong that a small group of people are going to knock them out. So I think it's that this immune system has not worked itself out for how to do this cleanly.
Yeah. And it's there's another tenuous link I can make here to Phage. Part of do you know about CRISPR-Cas?
Yeah, go ahead. Though.
Yeah, CRISPR-Cas is the bacterial immune system. So the way it was discovered, I should say discovered, it was about 5 or 6 different groups in like early 2000s showed that it existed. It takes little stretches of DNA from viruses or plasmids and inserts it into the bacterial genome. And then when a new bit of DNA comes into the cell, it literally like scans against it, like Control F find, to see if it can find a match. If it finds a match, it then binds to that and cuts everything up and destroys that incoming DNA. So the bacteria is able to like become resistant to a phage, through an adaptive immune system. It literally learns what to become resistant to. Some very clever people use that as a way to like, okay, you can target that. Obviously, that you can, if you have that bit of DNA in that enzyme that finds it, you can then target it and then tell it to cut there. And now you've got a way to edit specifically down to a base pair. That's how CRISPR-Cas does genome editing. It started from this is another thing about free market economics, right? It started from like people looking at how a bacteria that makes yogurt, like it had this weird stretch of DNA in it. Like if we hadn't funded that research, which would never happen in a free market economy, you would no reason to look at this bit of DNA. We wouldn't have CRISPR-Cas genome editing. $1 billion idea. Like So again, same thing. Like the internet immune system is being primed to like take ideas, scan, and say yes, this fits, or it doesn't fit, kill it. If it doesn't fit, kill it. And I think I'm optimistic that this is something we're going to move through. Like we're going to get better at it.
I don't think so, man. I think so. I have a buddy named Ryan Butner who coined a phrase that I think is a really interesting one, and it's called the Internet Archipelago, which is where instead of you having one giant universe where everyone is interconnected, and if I want to talk with somebody from Iran before we go to war with them, I just pull up a video chat and we talk it through. That's not actually how things worked out. What works out is that human beings are tribal by their nature. And when you find somebody that shares the same values as you, and a lot of times that's like a synchronization that makes life easier for you. You find a group of people, you know how they think. Now, as long as you think that way, you don't have problems in that group. You get to interact and engage and participate with them. But what that means for the internet is anywhere where there are bridges between networks that can't be meted out really well, that you can't find, then they split off, go find their own islands, and then talk about how horrible the other side is, and just reinforce a caricature, which means that instead of us having one large continent or one large universe, it's just a whole bunch of islands completely separated from themselves.
And so to put my conspiracy hat on for a little bit, there was a guy gave us just before obviously the whole virus stuff happened. We had an actual in-person seminar, and he was talking about how these nodes of communication have been artificially manipulated. Basically, this hasn't happened. It would happen in some way by random chance, like you would expect, as you said. Group A and Group B, they don't want to talk, so they separate, and then they argue against the imaginary Group A, and that reinforces it. He was saying that there's evidence of like network communication of like news information that has been directly manipulated to reinforce that solution even more. So someone's gaining from this, right? The system wouldn't exist. The system wouldn't be in this state unless someone was making money off of it. Like, it's the easiest way to get down the rabbit hole, right? But I hope, again, there's a way through this, and there's my hope is that, because again we're democratizing information, but then you get into the question of like, okay, well, if that information has to get screened through an immune system of like, oh, what's good information, what's bad information, what's right, what's wrong to say, and then you have you have people who are correctly saying some people's opinion, like, oh, every opinion is valid. Some people's opinion are that people of color are not human and deserve to die. Like, that is beyond abhorrent, right? You can't, I don't think we can live in a society where we say that bit of information has just as much right to freedom of expression as others. And again, that's enshrined in the Constitution. The Constitution says you have the right to free speech. It doesn't have, you specifically do not have the right to hate speech or violent speech. The government can't lock you up for saying, I think the government should be, changed in this way. But they can say if your speech is directly violent or aggressive or hateful, it can be meted against. I'm pretty free speech advocate, but again, I believe we do place limits on it, and we should as a society build protections against people who do believe that certain people are not human, for example. Or
that to me seems like an argument that if you were having a scientific discussion and somebody pulled in an example from that far away, it would be like, okay, well, we're not talking about the death of people based on where they came from. What we're talking about is people looked at the same information or even different information and came to certain conclusions. And now there's a group that's been put in charge of what information is correct or not correct. In this case, YouTube has said the World Health Organization or the CDC. And I mean, I, for one, listened very intently when they told me masks didn't work if they weren't fitted properly. My wife had bought a bunch of masks for a project a long time ago. And so we were like, hey, let's give all of the masks that we have to the hospital because they are the only ones to use it and know how to properly use it, and it's a lot more beneficial. And so we gave almost all of them away, and I flew on planes without having worn one. And so now they, like, a few days later, they come out and change what they were saying. And now I have to say, like, well, you know, I'm glad healthcare professionals have that. They're going to use it. They're going to need it a lot more than me. Yeah. But now I just went against my own interests because they lied to me.
Yeah. And I think that's incredibly dangerous, right? And I agree. I was shocked from the beginning they were saying masks don't do anything. It's like, yeah, they do. Like I still to this day don't understand outside of them saying there's a scarcity to masks, so we need medical health professionals to have them. That's to me the rational way to have that conversation. You say, okay, masks help. If you have masks, please give them to medical professionals because those are the places where the infection will spread or be controlled. Right. Or deaths will be mitigated. Not say, oh, they don't work, but as soon as they said, can you give them to hospitals? Like, well, hang on a second. Like, if they don't work for me, why are they working for them? That should, like, I told my parents because the UK still says don't wear a mask. I told them in February 12th, if you have a mask, wear it. Like, I don't care if you feel strange outside. It's the simple logical argument of like saying if they say they need them for hospital care workers, then they obviously have some effect.
So here's my point, James. Yeah. You are a PhD phage researcher. You are like very bright. We have spoken at length with the most, in-depth communications education that you can about science. Yeah. Do you think we should be afraid of a dictate from the large companies that the WHO and the CDC are the only medical advice that we should have because of that track record? I mean, is there anything they could do that would make them lose that moniker and therefore the guys from California, whether they're right or whether they're wrong, they never lied to us and told us to turn masks over? Yeah.
So this is a difficult place because I still believe that if you follow the CDC and the WHO's recommendations, as long as those recommendations are based in scientific, literature and stuff, we would have a better outcome for the virus. We would have a better outcome. Personally, that may not be true. And that's public policy is not necessarily decided at personal levels, right? Like if you gave away your mask, if you kept your masks, would you not be better off? Yeah. So, but are you willing to make a personal decision or follow the policy? I think I don't know if you should just listen, because I didn't listen to the CDC. I didn't listen to the WHO. Why? So I can't sit here and say, yeah, of course you should always listen to them. No, you shouldn't. You should, if you're in my position where you have 15 years of research experience in the field of infectious diseases, I can make some informed decision for my own safety. If I'm talking to my grandparents who are still, in the UK, were still going out for walks. Like, no, stay inside, you idiot. Like, there's different levels of what you can do for different people. But I think, again, this hits on the fact, like, your situation in a small village in Minnesota where there's 12 people is very different from, like, you don't need to close the local post office there. You don't need to close the local thing because probably there's no cases there. If you want to be sure that no one dies, then you close it, right? So I couldn't, in all good faith, say no. You should always listen to WHO. You should all listen to CDC. I think they have our best interests at heart. They have no reason not to, because again, the ability of societies to trust these sort of institutions gets tested at these points, and we've done nothing the last 10 years but try and erode the trust in big institutions, and they need trust to work effectively, right? Like if these institutions aren't trusted,
then the only thing they have is force, right? If you don't trust the big institutions, then the only thing you have is we demand that you do.
Yeah, the CDC has no power, right? And honestly, like if you actually go and work out what the CDC can do, because they're up the road from me, so we talk to them quite often, and they've come and give like seminars about stuff, and like if there's an outbreak. Imagine that, crazy, right? There's an outbreak. What can the CDC actually do? Recommend. That's all they can do. They have no power to like quarantine people or anything. That's not that they're not a what's the word they use? Like the FDA can like impound things. They have the authority to actually like restrict things and stop things. Or the FAA, the CDC can just sit back and say that ice cream's killing people. Don't eat it. They can't go into that store and take the ice cream away. They can just say that's probably poisonous ice cream. Don't touch it. And everything they do relies on public trust. And much like the vaccination thing with like in what was it, Afghanistan, where they found Osama. When what was the name of the SEAL Team 6 or so, whatever they're called?
Yeah,
when
Zero Dark 30.
Yeah. That's it. They got there. They found out information because they were hijacking a vaccine like camp. There was a vaccine camp there that was taking information from people and using to vaccinate against, I believe, polio. And that pissed me off so much. It's like, are you fucking insane? Like, why would you jeopardize the Taliban was already killing vaccine workers, for a decade now. Why would you jeopardize a vaccine thing, which will, if that gets out of control and polio comes back, hundreds of thousands of people can die? Or you can symbolically go and kill some guy who's been living in a shithole cave for the last 20 years because you gave him money in the late 80s. His family were rich. You took that away. He became, there's a whole weird economic political argument going on there. The level of people he can directly hurt or influence is so much more than this goddamn virus that you're like causing people not to trust the vaccination efforts. I was so pissed off when I found that, because it's like, we can eradicate polio. We could get rid of it. Fantastic. But if you start like undermining the trust in these public health policies, which is what that obviously has now done, because it was a cover for the CIA or whoever was doing it. It was a cover for them. They were literally conspiracy level theory people. They're saying, no, these people are just there to collect information about like Taliban leaders. It's insane. And I'm annoyed that the WHO and CDC didn't have the adult conversation, say, no, masks will help, but they will help more in these locations. They will stop people who need them from dying much more than help you. Again, the effect a mask will help you is actually quite small. Like unless you're sick, wearing a mask maybe will reduce your chance of infection by 20%. I wear a mask when I go outside. 20%, great. I had some leftover from doing woodworking stuff, like the covered in sawdust, but the N95 masks. I know how to fit them. Great. If I had a box full of ones, I would still give them away to a local hospital. But the trust goes both ways, right? They should trust us to understand if you explain public policy correctly and you are trustworthy, then the population will believe what you say and be able to take that in. I hope.
I think that one of the really good things that Kevin McKernan said that really rang true to me is, outside of the private system, you don't have the same market forces. So the people that are donned, you are the communications person. You're the person that's going to decide how we talk about things and how we're going to handle it. Like, they don't get wiped out if they aren't good at what they do. In the corporate world, for the most part, if you're bad at communicating, it may take a little while for them to seek you out, but they will eventually find you and destroy you. And then a new person comes in and they're much better at communicating.
See, I would say even in academia, like I am coming for people's jobs, right? Like if you're an assistant professor at a university, be afraid, because I'm coming to take your job. I think this idea that there's no competition in academia or like public policy positions isn't true. There is. We're hungry. We're coming for you, right? It's and if you're bad at communicating, your job is on the line. If Fauci wasn't doing a good job, there's 6 other Faucis behind him, right? There's 6 other people who are maybe slightly younger, slightly taller, better looking. I don't know. But they are there, and they will come for the job. They will come and take it. They will say, no, this person's not doing an adequate job. I don't agree with that on principle. Like, again, from my own position, I am gunning for people's jobs. I am working to show that their work is not as good as mine, and I will take their job if I can.
Hey, fair point, man.
Yeah,
James. This has been a great conversation. I was so glad you stopped by on Kevin's post, and I hope we stay in touch. If people wanted to learn more about phage research or stay in touch with you, how would they do that?
They can find me on Twitter. It's probably the easiest way. It's James R. Gurney. Also, if you're just Phage research, there's a Twitter handle called Phage Papers, which is a bot that just goes and like collates all the current Phage research papers. But there's 100 great researchers out in the world. I couldn't possibly list them all who are doing some really interesting work. If you're interested in like phage therapy work, there's people up in Yale probably leading the charge on that. A guy called Paul Turner's lab. He has some of the coolest work and actually going into patients and trying to save lives.
Well, cool, man. I know it is a whole big field of research that opens up a lot of possibilities and hope for a lot of people, not necessarily on coronavirus, but on other problems that we face. Hey, man, thank you so much for stopping by.
It'll be my pleasure. My pleasure, Vance.